These two species, which I found living together on the same tree, were challenging to identify as the phone apps for plant identification gave the very general identity Polypodiaceae. So I then tried Google Lens, which resulted in the genus Pyrrosia appearing for both species for several of the photos I uploaded. Other species names that came up on Google Lens were eliminated, for instance in the case of Campanularium, because some of the characteristics did not correspond to the sample, such as size. Another species name which came up as the identity was Dreamoglossum, which is now accepted as a synonym of Pyrrosia. So I leaned towards identifying both species as members of the genus Pyrrosia, but of course I checked using detailed characteristics. The identity as a Pyrrosia was strengthened by the orange-colored spores, since Pyrrosia in Greek means fire-colored, and the presence of stellate hairs on the lamina of the sample, which is a distinguishing characteristic of Pyrrosia. However, stellate hairs on the lamina are found in other species such as Platycerium. Platycerium was differentiated from Pyrrosia by its having basal leaves, forked foliage leaves, and pseudo-acrostichoid sorus patches with narrow, linear, densely packed receptacles. Pyrrosia are recognized by their habit, usually epiphytic, though some species may be terrestrial, size, usually small, rarely medium-sized, rhizomes creeping and surface-dwelling, fronds simple, articulated to the phylopodia on the rhizome, often thick and leathery, and variously densely covered with stellate hairs, often stellate tomentose. Venation, netted but often obscured, hydathodes which secrete water, visible as white dots on the upper surface of some species. Sori, naked and sometimes forming cynosaurus where multiple sori are fused into long chains. Among the Pyrrosia species reported to be present in Malaysia are Pyrrosia angustata, Pyrrosia adnescens, Pyrrosia princeps, Pyrrosia platyphylla, Pyrrosia albicans, Pyrrosia christi, Pyrrosia lanceolata, Pyrrosia rasamale, Pyrrosia stigmosa, Pyrrosia penangiana, Pyrrosia numerarifolia, Pyrrosia longifolia, Pyrrosia kinnabaluensis, Pyrrosia phalanx, and Pyrrosia palaceloides. Based on the gross morphology of the two species to be identified, which had distinctly dimorphic fronds and long rhizomes, the Pyrrosia with monomorphic fronds and or short rhizomes were eliminated as the species identity. The species eliminated were Pyrrosia stigmosa, Pyrrosia penangiana, Pyrrosia platyphylla, Pyrrosia princeps, Pyrrosia christi, Pyrrosia rasamale, Pyrrosia longifolia, and Pyrrosia albicans. In terms of gross morphology, sample species 1 is smaller than sample species 2 and has lamina almost circular to broadly oblong that looked similar to Pyrrosia phalanx, Pyrrosia numerarifolia, and Pyrrosia palaceloides. Sample species 2 with fronds linear lanceolate looked similar to Pyrrosia lanceolata, Pyrrosia adnescens, Pyrrosia angustata, and Pyrrosia kinnabaluensis. Comparing sample species 1's characters of rhizomes and fronds to similar species present in Malaysia, it was found that Pyrrosia numerarifolia was disqualified as the identity of the sample by its fertile frond sorus all over the lamina, stellate hairs dimorphic and densely packed on the lamina, and rhizome scales ranging from linear to round and ovate with uniformly colored acumen. Pyrrosia phalanx was disqualified as the sample's identity as it had Cynosaurus sunken, many paraphyses in a medial row in the Cynosaurus, scales triangular elongate and less strongly ciliate at the apex than the base, and a rhizome cross-section with a subepidermal sclerenchyma sheet and a solid centrally situated sclerenchyma strand, as well as about 5 vascular bundles. Sample species 1 was identified as Pyrrosia palaceloides, otherwise known as dragon scale fern, due to its characteristics of epiphytic habit, Rhizome creeping, surface-dwelling, scaly. Rhizome cross-section with subepidermal sclerenchyma sheet and a central sclerenchyma strand with 3 to 4 vascular bundles. Rhizome scales round to triangular, ciliate at base and apex, central part dark brown, marginal part light brown transparent. Fronds simple and dimorphic. Sterile fronds sessile to shortly stipitate, lamina nearly circular, oblong or elliptic, 1 to 7 by 1 to 2 centimeters, base rounded to attenuate, apex rounded or obtuse, margin entire. Fertile fronds stipe 0.1 to 1.0 centimeters long, lamina linear lanceolate 2.5 to 24 by 0.3 to 1.5 centimeters. Lamina thick and leathery without hydathodes, surfaces sparsely covered by monomorphic stellate hairs, veins anastomosing but hardly visible. Sori naked, situated submarginally, superficial and forming cynosaurus. Spores light brown, variously warty. Then, to identify unknown sample species 2, its rhizomes and fronds were compared to similar species in Malaysia. Sample species 2 and Pyrrosia kinabaluensis have fronds about the same size, but in Pyrrosia kinabaluensis, the indument was dimorphic as opposed to the sample species 2's monomorphic indument. Also, in Pyrrosia kinabaluensis, sori was superficial all over the lamina and closely packed, whereas in the sample species 2, sori were generally from the apex to about 1/3 of the frond and sunken. In Pyrrosia kinabaluensis, the rhizome scales acumen was uniformly colored, unlike in the sample where the rhizome scale acumen has a hyaline margin. Additionally, the altitudinal range where Pyrrosia kinabaluensis has been found is higher than where the sample was found. Pyrrosia angustata was not the identity of sample species 2 due to several differences. Rhizome not grooved ventrally, and rhizome in cross-section showing sclerenchyma in a sheet with vascular bundles. Lamina dark green above and grayish-green on the lower surface, sori large and arranged in one regular row at each side of the rachis, usually appearing raised in the upper surface, indument dimorphic. This left two other possibilities for the identity of sample species 2, that is Pyrrosia lanceolata and Pyrrosia adnescens. But assignment of sample species 2 to one of these species is challenging as they are very similar. Based on Hoovenkamp, under the name Pyrrosia lanceolata are plants with a range of differences that may be separate species such as Pyrrosia adnescens but have not been formalized as different species. A dependable website, that of the National Parks Board Singapore, states that Pyrrosia adnescens is a synonym of Pyrrosia lanceolata. Satija Burr and Bardwaj stated that earlier taxonomists had postulated that Pyrrosia adnescens is a hybrid of Pyrrosia lanceolata and Pyrrosia nuda. But the Kew website accepts both Pyrrosia lanceolata and Pyrrosia adnescens as separate species. So identifying sample species 2, based on the contrasting literature found, for example, Hoovenkamp describing Pyrrosia lanceolata as moderately to distinctly dimorphic, whereas Satija Burr and Bardwaj stating that Pyrrosia lanceolata is never dimorphic, is my best guess based on the information I assessed, and that educated guess is Pyrrosia lanceolata. The characteristics of sample species 2, which tallied to Pyrrosia lanceolata, are rhizome long creeping, narrowly grooved ventrally, the rhizome cross-section showing a distinct sclerenchyma sheet, a single central sclerenchyma strand, and about 5 vascular strands. Scales of 2 types, large scales narrowly ovate 1 to 7.8 by 0.3 to 1.3 millimeters, short scales more or less orbicular to ovate, scale bases entire to ciliate, scale acumen light brown, ciliate often with a distinct hyaline margin, scale apex and sometimes base has glandular hairs. Fronds distinctly dimorphic, fronds widest about the middle, base cuneate or narrowly cuneate, apex obtuse or acute, fertile fronds, stipes up to 9 cm, laminar 3.5 to 31 by 0.3 to 3.5 cm, sterile fronds, stipes up to 5 cm, laminar 2 to 24 by 0.3 to 4.3 cm, hydathodes absent, intumen monomorphic, sparse, whitish to brown, the sori orbicular, several in a row, not confluent, sunken, situated apically in a more or less contracted part of the lamina. Spores warty. Provided are references for a more detailed study of the genus Pyrrosia. And more plants are identified on my channel, so do subscribe to learn about these plants with which we share our surrounding space.